Did you see any common themes around frustrations that you noticed or anything like that?
Every conversation was either price or it was quote unquote service.
Hiring managers will interview people and sell them the dream, and then a month or two in, they kind of realize they've been sold something that wasn't what they thought they were getting into. It's a waste of time and money and energy for everyone.
We can't do that being just a small business, and we want to be the most sort of trusted forwarder in the country. And if you're planning on running a lean supply chain, just bottlenecking yourself into one solution, I think is very risky. You can't sit here and think the consolidation of some of these really big businesses can't have an impact. I go back to is when you look at businesses and you look at their core competencies of what they're really good at.
Sean Crook, mate, thank you. Welcome to Forward Thinking. Really appreciate you coming on and taking the time to join us. I wanted to start with a story I actually came across in the AFR a few months ago. And apparently, beer had something to do with how you ended up in logistics. Can you tell
Probably
us a
has
bit
something
about
to
that?
do with why I've stayed in it as well, to be honest, mate. Thanks for having me and sort of don't see enough of these sort of type of conversations probably happening as well within our industry, and it helps sort of making things more visible. So, no, good on you for sort of doing this and listen to one report, which was great, which we were talking about. But yes, I used to work for Lion, Nathan, and well, worked for Lion, but before that, I also had a background in sort of insights and data analytics, but basically went into a role that I probably shouldn't have been in, to be honest with you. I went into sort of a brand marketing role. I don't know if you've heard of the Kieran beer brand as
Yeah.
well. You probably would have seen around. Well, at the time, Lion as a brand, and we're kind of going through quite a few different sort of changes. They lost a big part of their portfolio, which was Corona and a variety of different other brands. And Kieran basically were kind of relaunching kind of Kieran product and brand. So I went on as the brand marketing manager on that brand, and we sort of had all our ad spend. We were relaunching. I think it was the end of the year. It would have been at the end of the calendar year. I forget which year now. We had sort of samurai swords and bar mats and everything stereotypical Japanese and glassware that was sort of going into sort of bars and restaurants to build the brand up before we went into retail. And it ended up being a bit of a nightmare in terms of the logistics, to be honest with you. So the logistics was sort of a big part of it. And I was speaking to Chris, who's my business partner now, but who's a mate of mine that I went to school with, and had his sort of career in logistics and forwarding, and it ended up just being a bit of a disaster. And I sort of had the freight forwarders and our suppliers who were kind of working on, because I kind of wasn't involved in that type of stuff, but all I knew was we were going to have to delay a bit of a launch and an ad campaign. It was quite scary, and we didn't have anything in Pack Center here to sort of get out, and it was all driven by a number of things, whether that was communication, reporting, technology, everything above that could have gone wrong went wrong. But I think it's triggered sort of a lot of conversations that Chris and I then had that eventually led to us sort of starting Neolink, which was great.
Yeah. So you kind of you felt, I guess, the pain firsthand, like from a customer point of view, and that kind of sparked the curiosity of how you could do things a little bit differently and better.
Yeah, I think from that point, I think it took us almost like a year and a half of sort of writing business plans. And Chris would have always probably started his own sort of freight forwarding business. To be honest with you, he talked about it and thought it would be something he would potentially do. And but then to sort of experience the problem firsthand, and I wouldn't necessarily say it was just down to the freight forwarder or processes being done badly. I think it also fell online, to be honest with you, as well, and how they engaged with their partners and their key stakeholders, the suppliers, the factories, everything and all of the above that you could imagine, where anything that was probably not best practice, which is very unlike Lion, like for something that should, and they probably do for a lot of parts of their raw materials and large kind of initiatives, but it was a fairly big initiative, and it just didn't, just the way that it kind of worked out. Yeah, it kind of there was a lot of kind of, I guess, areas where I kind of thought, I could potentially sort of work with Chris on building something that had a bit more of a, I guess, kind of got rid of all of the efficiencies, but also, Chris was sitting down with me at the back of his room when I got there. I literally went out to the back of his house, and I was going to go and drown my sorrows in a beer in the back of his house. And he had a manila folder sitting on his desk out of the back, and it had a task sheet on the front of it. And it basically said to me, he goes, "That's a shipment." And I was like, "What do you mean that's a shipment?" And he's like, "That goes from one department to the next, and it gets signed off, and then that's what we deal with." And I'm like, "You've got to be joking." I'm like, "How is
Yeah.
that even possible?" And I think back then as well, it was, some business operated differently, but it was real big eye opener. I was like, wow, this could be a really big opportunity if somebody steps in and, you know, does this really, really well. And then you do your
Yeah.
research and you find that there's actually quite a lot of really good businesses that are doing similar things, but we try to put our own little spin on it and learn. And we
Yeah.
spent a year planning and we launched the business.
Yeah, nice. And I think that was around like late 2016, if I'm not mistaken, perhaps early 2017. Like the first couple of years in any business, it's always fun and games, as you know. Were there any particular initial hurdles that you guys faced when you first set up? Or
Yeah, we had 12 customers that basically said to us, we went out, we put together our pitch decks. I put my credit card down and paid for the logo. And then we kind of came up with the proposition and what we were going to be about and how we're going to do things differently. And we had a chance meeting with Sinclair at WiseTech and Richard White, and we kind of thought, right, this is what we're going to basically put together. And we're going to go to market and talk about all the efficiencies we can create and all these other things. And we had like 12 people, I think, say to us, "Yep, we're gonna give you guys a go. We're gonna have a commitment. We're gonna work with you." And then every single one of them said no. And so we'd left our
wow,
jobs, we'd resigned, and I'd sold my house. And then I think
wow,
and then it kind of hit like it really kind of hit reality when Chris's wife got pregnant, I think really soon into us starting the business. And I was like, yeah, okay. And we got told from the start by mentors and stuff that you're not going to pay yourself a dollar for probably a year, 15 months. And I didn't really believe that. I thought we could do it quicker, but they were pretty much right. And so we kind of built the foundations of the business really solidly commercially, which I think has definitely helped us later on. But yeah, I remember 12 and it's funny, out of those 12 that I think said no, I think 10 of them eventually did come on board, which I think ended up taking like a period of 3, 4 years. So I think you can have the best plans laid out and it just doesn't
yeah.
work. So, and you can have ones that surprise you and give you a crack and give you a go and, and work with you and it kind of works out. But yeah, I remember
Wow.
that 12 of them saying
S-
yes and then backing out.
Straight into the deep end. And when you guys first started, did you see any like common themes around frustrations from customers that you noticed, or any kind of patterns where you thought that maybe you guys can do that part of the operations a bit differently, or anything like that?
There was a couple of things. I think one of the things that I look at things from very much the customer experience lens. Chris is very much more sort of the operational guy, which kind of makes sense, right, given our backgrounds. But I just noticed that every conversation was either price or it was quote unquote service. Quote, it's all about service and it's all about price. And I think Freightos have done some great reports on this, looking at what the decision matrix is in choosing a freight forwarder. Number one was always price, number two, service, and then number three was kind of performance related. And then all of a sudden, what happened, I think, during COVID was it completely flipped really on its head, where visibility and technology and how efficient companies were became really important. And that has flow on effects into price. But I was and when you've got so many freight forwarders around the world doing the same thing, creating that differentiation is really, really quite important. But we had 3 points of difference that we talked about when we went out around what we were doing with WiseTech around workflow automation. I think that kind of set us in a really good stead that we built that foundation straight away, which I think was, not necessarily happening. There were maybe one or two other companies that were probably doing it at the time, introducing Pave and workflow automation. But that kind of, we had a blank canvas, so we were pretty lucky. But speaking to companies, it was just glaringly obvious that it was either price and service, and that's a very, when you're going into a room to pitch, you've got to go beyond that. You've got to address those things, but you've got to go beyond that.
Has that changed much, like the price and service aspect? Like, customers more savvy now? Are they looking into other aspects apart from just price and service?
It's somewhat commoditized, so it's not difficult for people to look around and look at price points. And I think that's, in some ways, that can be both positive and it can be negative. So people are very clued up. They understand pricing. But then I think enabling the differentiation and showing people where you add value and sort of creating more bespoke supply chain solutions for your customers, that's ironic. And as we look at things like AI and other things start coming into getting introduced, that's becoming more important. It's more about how you demonstrate the value that you offer to your customers that might be beyond the standard price and service. And so we very much tried to do that. We've been, given my background sort of in data and analytics and some of the really good people that we've got from in here that I've learned from and Chris has learned from as well. And we've kind of learned some from really good consultants in the industry. We've commoditized, I think, our data very well. in terms of how we go to market, how we present, how we sort of deliver, our quarterly business reviews, how we put solutions in place. So we've tried to make sure that we have tangible conversations where there can be improvements to the broader supply chain, not just a single price on a 20-foot container out of Shanghai to Sydney.
Like, obviously, technology and automation is playing a pretty big part. How are you guys sort of leveraging AI and technology? And you mentioned when you guys first started Neolink, that was kind of at the forefront as well. I guess, what are you doing differently than a lot of other forwarders when it does come to tech and automation?
First and foremost, there's a lot of forwarders out there that are starting to play around and trial with AI in different ways. So I think we tend to kind of talk quite negatively about how we adopt and use technology. I think in a lot of ways there's some companies out there that are doing things really positively and trialing and testing different things. I think CH Robinson even signed a deal with OpenAI. So that I think as an industry, there are key players in there that are doing things. I think the obvious one, most important one, which is kind of quite obvious, is around some of the kind of workflow and documentation process when it comes to sort of I would say, critical workflow tasks. So whether that might be pre-alert registration, whether it might be things like sea cargo automation, invoice automation, that there's a lot there, I think, that we started doing at the beginning when it came to sort of triggers and workflows within our ERP system, within CargoWise. And I think that kind of put us in good stead when we trialed different RPA lab programs and different sort of PDF AI reading technologies probably 3-4 years ago that didn't work. We trialed it and tested it, it didn't work. And then we kind of found a partner to work with us that had the plugins that made it work really, really well. It saves time, it makes us more efficient, but then it frees up our team to really focus on the things that I think really matter. And I think there are forwarders out there that are kind of being forced to look at that, because I think as the industry does become, you have a lot of these technologies available. It's great for companies like us and even the small to mid market forwarders and that service kind of those kind of mid tier kind of Australian importers and exporters. We can be really competitive and we can offer a great service. So I think even though there's a lot of consolidation happening, there's also a role I think that we can play. So there's a lot of really cool technology available. I'm really excited to see what happens as you kind of move beyond sort of the assistant automation kind of piece. And then as we sort of go down the AGI route and you look at different agents, if you like, an agent model around how that beds into your workflows and creates that kind of working capacity, that's really exciting. I think when you
Yeah.
start looking at, you have to look at the different skills and the different things that we require within our kind of staff and within the industry altogether around, well, what do we now offer as value as freight forwarders beyond, if everything's sort of being done very, manually, and we move on from that, what are some of the other value added tasks that we can do that can help benefit the customer and offer value?
Yeah, definitely. And has that changed, like AI and technology, has that changed the way that you view growth as well for Neolink? Whereas maybe in the old days, it was all about X amount of headcount might equal X amount of revenue, but introducing automation and AI and some other aspects that can free up more time, has that sort of shifted the mindset a little bit in terms of maybe what growth looks like?
Yeah, it definitely has. I think in terms of what it does, in terms of, well, it allows us to scale and move quicker. I think that's probably a really important thing. I think you do get bogged down by a lot of the day to day when it comes to, take this the right way, Sam, recruitment, um,
Yep.
interviewing, bring on board staff. Those things take time. Like we've got the same, our headcount is the same as what it was 2 years ago, and the business has grown, I think, 2.5 times since then. It allows us to take our wages up. It allows us to reinvest back into the business. So yes, absolutely, it does change the way we look at that growth sort of moving forwards, but it allows us to reinvest back into the business, where into the right areas. I mean, we've recently, gone through sort of our first sort of acquisition, albeit a small one, to sort of trial this out as a next phase of our growth strategy. But more importantly, I think for us is that we look at, it has to kind of have a three-way win. It almost has to, there has to be a benefit for Neolink, a benefit for our suppliers and our people, and also our customers. And if all key stakeholders are benefiting from deploying that technology, then we trial, test, learn, educate ourselves, and move forwards.
And that's probably a good segue, right, into the exciting news that you mentioned. So, acquiring the Australian division of RAF. Tell us more about that, like in terms of, I guess, why now was the right time and what the kind of motivator was behind that.
Look, I think we kind of decided at the end of last year. I mean, we've got business development managers and a BD team with a presence now nationally, and we were fortunate enough at the end of last year to sort of. I think you probably got that article from the AFR award that we won at the end of last year, where we won the Customer Champion Award, and that definitely had a positive impact in terms of the organic growth of the business. And that's really sort of, we're up probably over 30% this year so far, and it's really sped up that growth. But one of the things that Chris and I have always looked of is that we want to be the most sort of trusted forwarder in the country. That's sort of a long-term sort of objective of us, and we can't do that being just a small business. And so if we're going to be able to compete longer term, we need to grow. We need to be something of scale. And one of the strategies we've looked at as well is looking at sort of a more broader M&A strategy. We've looked at probably two or three other businesses where we got to heads agreement and they've fallen down. This kind of opportunity with RIF happened as I was walking through the WCA conference in Dubai. And then within the space of probably 6, 7 months, the opportunity came to sort of obviously take on the customer portfolio and a couple of members of staff. And, it's by no means is it a massive acquisition, but it's an opportunity for us to trial, test, look at the systems integration piece. How do we focus on bringing on board really good people and a customer base that we think we can add value to? And straight away, I think for Chris and I, it's not just about acquiring a customer book, it's looking at a group of people and customers that we feel we can really relate to. And to be fair to RIF, there's a lot that we can relate to with both the ownership and the management model, and there'll be an ongoing relationship between us and them as well, more broadly, longer term. And, we were excited to sort of kind of step in and sort of engage with those sort of customers and look at how we can improve, giving them access to sort of all the tools and the visibility tools and the AI tools that we have. So it seemed like a fairly straightforward sort of win for us. And to be fair, the guys that have joined us in here, they're fitting in like a glove, and they're gonna be a great fit within the model, and they're already getting the benefits. I think it was quite interesting sorting to see the last sort of couple of weeks where they're plugging into the Neolink universe and all of a sudden freeing up a huge portion of their time, which usually would be invested in basic data entry tasks and how quickly we get go to market and the benefits of how we work with our agent partners in terms of how data and system shipments and quotes and everything comes into the system very quickly and efficiently.
Yeah.
They're quite excited, and it'll only benefit, I think, more broadly, just all those customer supply chains and how we move.
That's awesome. And I guess with any acquisition, right, culture is one of those key things that really has to be managed carefully and probably easier when it's on a smaller scale. But I definitely see it on larger scales with some of the consolidation that's happened over the last, 12 to 18 months. When you and Chris started the business, did you have like visions of what kind of culture you were trying to create, or did that just naturally evolve over time? Or
I came from Lion, right, where Lion, a lot of the sort of culture and behaviors they kind of walked the walk and talked the talk, to be honest with you. When it came to culture, it actually played a key role in your annual reviews. It played a key role in how people behaved and engaged. When you got a 5,000 people company, it was really impressive for me just seeing how everybody bought into that and how everybody and they did it flowed through everything, their hiring process, their review process, how they engaged in everything from meetings with their suppliers, with their customers. You could see the consistency. So when I was leaving, I spoke to Gordon Trainer, who's now at Suntory, and I said to him, can I take everything from Lion and, and take it into the. He goes, yeah, for sure. He goes, take it. He goes, as long as you're not selling beer, he goes, you're fine. So we basically implemented a lot of those kind of core behaviors of what we felt and modified them slightly around our 7 behaviors. It's not mine, it's Dr. Steve Covey, wrote a great book about it. And it influences how we profile, how we hire, how we go through our reviews, our development plans with our staff. It kind of translates through into how we engage with customers. But yeah, absolutely. It was super critical, and it's super critical to the acquisition process. We had to look at, the people, both the people you're actually doing a deal with and engaging with, that there's that level of transparency and honesty, but then also, the people element as well that we're bringing on board and the customers that we're engaging with. And we saw a huge amount of synergy there.
no, that's good. And outside of the general freight forwarding and logistics experience, when you guys are interviewing and looking to grow the team, are there any particular personality traits that is really important for you and Chris when you are hiring? And it could be across any role, not just sales.
For Chris and I think I really look for people that ask a lot of questions in interviews about us and the business and about what the role's about. I think that having somebody that's sort of naturally inquisitive, I think especially in this industry is quite important. That's always a pretty important one for me is at the end of the interview process, how engaged is somebody and what are the questions that they're asking, what type of questions are they asking. And then for me, actually, I think is actually having an opinion. So I think having an opinion on what's going on in the industry, what are they seeing, what's happening, do they have a view on potentially, how freight forwarding is changing, how freight forwarding businesses are going, what AI tools and different things they're using that can help them their job. I like to see people that are kind of not just thinking about a job as a job, but actually thinking more broadly about the industry and about, because that shows for me there's a bit of a passion and energy. Like we spend more time, we say it all the time, we spend more time in here than what we do with our own families. So it's important that we feel that we have a broader purpose, I think, for what we're doing. And I think for everybody out there, having a job's important, and there's an importance that family's family, and that takes precedence over pretty much everything. But if you are coming in here, you almost kind of have to have a bit of a belief in what we're doing and what we're about and what we're trying to achieve. And if people do have that, if they buy into the sort of story and ask the questions and they feel like, okay, this is going to be the right role for them, that's the most important thing. I think what happens too much of the interview process, I think everybody's selling each other a little bit too much. They're either overselling themselves, we're overselling the business, and not being clear on exactly what the requirements are of the role or what the requirements are of them. And that's where time is wasted then for both parties, and it doesn't work out well. But I like to see that inquisitiveness in the interview process.
That's very important, right? And I think that once people start, so that's kind of what you look for, I guess, during an interview process and people that potentially fit Neolink's culture and DNA. Once they actually people start, how do you foster such a great environment and a great culture where people actually want to show up to work, especially coming out of post-COVID work from home situation? It was always a lot of companies had a bit of a battle, right, trying to get people back into the office. But at the same time, you're trying to create an environment where people want to come into the office, right? So how do you balance that?
It's a really good question. When you look at, I think you just have to be, first and foremost, I think you have to be very clear on who you are and what business you are, the type of environment that you want to have. And I think the culture, we talked about it before, the culture and behaviors, I think are a really key part of that. And one of the things that we kind of always talk about is one of the kind of key behaviors that we have is around continuous improvement. And that's a really important one, and continuous improvement is always about also constant change. There can be challenges with that because when you all of a sudden say to an entire team, hey, we're about to roll out some really cool AI tools. We're going to roll out some more automation into the business. We're going to do, going to do this and that. You have people that might not necessarily be comfortable with change, and that's okay. And we've had turnover. It happens, right? But I think you've got to be very clear on what you are. And I think when you have that, and you have people that are coming into an environment where they're really clear on what the expectations are, the culture, the behaviors, they foster that culture themselves. And look, we've got really good GMs. I mean, we've got the tenure of the team now out here is fantastic, and the experience is, we've got a hugely experienced team and group of people that have been in the industry for a very long time, and they foster that environment and culture themselves. And I also go back to as well transparency. The one thing that they get from not just myself and Chris, but also Jun and Matt as well, who are both our GMs. There's a huge amount of transparency around what's happening in the business in terms of monthly, both our monthly meetings, quarterly socials, Christmas parties, all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Everybody kind of gets that type of engagement where they feel like they have a real understanding of what's going on, even
Mm.
particularly around things as sensitive as AI and the deployment of AI. And we're very open and transparent. But then people want to, I also find like with people at the moment within the industry, they want to feel like they're a part of something where we're not necessarily on the forefront completely, but they want to know that they've got access to tools and software and technology that can make their lives and jobs easier. I think when they feel like they come into a place and environment like that, and they start off and they feel like they believe in the overall mission of the business, I feel like everything else falls into place when they start. And we catch up with everybody 3 months in. We let them get their feet under the desk. We have open, transparent conversations. We get feedback from our people. So I think if you foster that environment and culture and you live your behaviors, it flows through to an environment where and I say this as well, it isn't for everybody. Our business isn't for everybody. There may be people that want to work for a very heavily departmentalized, hierarchical business that has, very different mission statement and vision and objectives than what we have, and that's okay. But
Yeah.
I think if you're not clear and you're wishy-washy and you have different rules and for different people, I think that's when it becomes very, very difficult.
That transparency is very, very key. And I think, like, I see it a lot where hiring managers, whether it's owners or sales managers, will interview people and sell them the dream, right? And then it sounds great, candidates start, and then a month or two in, they kind of realize they've been sold something that wasn't what they thought they were getting into. And ultimately, a lot of the time end up leaving, and it's a waste of time and money and energy for everyone, right? Not just the company, but the candidate joining as well. So I think that like being transparent and authentic and actually just laying the cards out on the table so people know exactly what they're getting involved with, right? And they can make
100%.
an informed decision. That's good. Going back a little bit, like there's been a lot of consolidation, as we said, especially on the bigger end of town.
Mm.
We're seeing it with some of the shipping lines, right, where they're sort of going full service and moving into that forwarding aspect as well. Does that create opportunity for some of the smaller to mid tiers, or is it? I mean, should people be worried? Like, what? I'd love to hear your take on some of that consolidation at the larger end.
There's two ways of thinking about it, right? I think that you can't sit here and think, the consolidation of some of these really big businesses can't have an impact, I think more broadly on the entire marketplace, and they can have either buying power or I think that'd be a little bit naive for me to say that. The one thing I go back to is when you look at businesses and you look at their core competencies of what they're really good at, what do we do that we're really good at might be very different to what Maersk and Damco might have been good at when that happened, a few years ago. So I go back to what's the core competency of sort of a freight forwarder in particular, because for years companies have been able to set up their own internal freight forwarding departments. They've been able to go directly to the shipping lines themselves as well. I feel like I've seen a bit more of the opposite, where there has been consolidation at the top end of town. There's been a very, very large portion of our customer base, I feel, that has come from a lot of those consolidations that's happened over the period of the last, I'll call it the last 3 to 4 years. And I don't think I'd be the only sort of small to medium sized sort of freight forwarder in Australia that would tell you otherwise. I think we service that mid market really, really well that wants that extra service. But then it's very strange as well, because we've been a part of some really big sort of global tenders with some ASX listed businesses, been with shipping lines, and we've won the tenders. It's really strange. I think it comes down to the type of companies that you're dealing with, the type of relationship that they have with their supply chains and their freight forwarders, and what the demands are. I think of what they're looking for. Are they holding a huge amount of inventory, and they don't really need to have somebody that really performs above and beyond and have that extra service? Maybe they're quite happy to sit on 10 to 12 months worth of stock. I'm seeing more the opposite, I must admit. I think as the economy gets really tighter, I mean, we had the inflation data come out yesterday, which is not great. It's gone up. Obviously, we're at 2.8. And what I've noticed looking at tenders is a lot of companies are trying to run a lot leaner. They're trying to hold less stock. They're moving a bit more to that just in time model. And I think having a one size fits all approach where you book with one shipping line, they manage it end to end. If you're planning on running a lean supply chain, I think just bottlenecking yourself into one solution, I think, is very risky. Obviously, I'm going to say that, being a bit biased from my position. I mean, I'm looking at a tender right now. It's quite interesting. We're looking at a global tender right now, which we're probably going to sign up, and as part of the Australian network here. And it's funny, they were really squeezing hard on just their freight rates at like $100. It was very silly. And I asked them for all of their inventory data, what they're holding in stock for their 200 plus SKUs. It was in sort of wine and alcohol space, and they're holding like 12 months worth of inventory. And I'm like, why are you holding 12 months worth of inventory for? And they're like, well, we'd like to run leaner, but we need better performance. I'm like, well, you can't just pick one shipping line then. You need to think a bit more broadly and a bit more outside of the box. And so we've used a lot of their data actually through a lot of we've got built our own AI bots, which has been really cool. So we've actually then plugged all that into AI, and we've kind of had a look at their inventory management, how we're going to plan their services. And we put forward a different proposition where we're like, well, we can save you 3 grand potentially on moving more of your per shipment if you're moving a lot of your shipping plans into transshipments. Oh, we can't do that. Well, why not? You're carrying 12 months worth of stock. You don't need to carry 12 months worth of stock. And they've been very open about that. So I think when people, it depends on the demands of the customer of what they're really, really looking for, whether they're going to be moving, I think, more towards that infrastructure play, where they're just quite happy to do an online booking. And there will be people that want to look at that. I just think when things get tighter and margins get tighter, I think that people will think about things a little bit differently. The demands on forwarding will be different as well.
That's interesting, right? Using that data and that, especially around AI, to kind of give almost predictive insights to customers to help make some of those decisions. Moving forward, I guess we'll start looking back over the last maybe 12 months, 18 months. It's been a bit of a challenging market for a lot of people and a lot of forwarders. We've had a couple of interest rate cards. There seems to be a little bit more stability potentially coming out of the US, although that seems to change every single week. But what's your view on the next 6 months, 12 months, just in the general forwarding market, and what your kind of take is on that?
Ports have stayed flat, and we've had almost, immigration's been through the roof. So there's no doubt that things have been tight. The economy's tight, which directly translate obviously into imports and into exports. Just my take on is when we're speaking to our customer base, we've got sort of over 350 customers now. I feel like there's no in between. I think people are either now not setting any records, their businesses might be struggling, going backwards in terms of volume, but then I've got some that are booming and taking advantage of new business opportunities. So I feel like if there's just sort of a business that's just ticking along and relatively stable, I think you're going backwards, especially with inflation the way that it is and margin compression and all of these different things with the retail channels or wholesale channels. Everybody's getting that margin squeeze, and the dollar's not fantastic either. So my view on it is that if we look over the course of the next 12 months, I think with interest rates looking like we're not going to get down to probably the numbers we thought we did, and things just this is kind of the new normal. I only really see businesses growing right now that are going into new business. They're trying different things, they're launching new products, they're opening into new markets because the economy's not looked that crash hot. So it's funny, I've got one of my key customers that's signed up a deal with Woolies for a new brand, which is going to be absolutely gigantic for them. And then conversely, you look at if he didn't do that deal, his business is probably flat, if not going backwards 5%. So, and then conversely, I've got other companies and other clients that we work with where they're really, really struggling. So, yeah, I'm going to be very interested to see how this sort of all plays out over the course of the next 12 months with interest rates and with consumer
Mhm.
confidence. I think everybody got a lot more confident at the beginning of the year. We saw consumer confidence go up. That's kind of I'd be very interested to see what happens. I think with confidence going into Black Friday, we've all obviously kind of it's weird post COVID. We've kind of had peak season kind of happens a lot earlier now. We get a lot more forward visibility on what's going to happen with Black Friday, and that kind of sets the tone of what's going to probably happen for the rest of the year. So yeah, I'm interested to see what happens there, mate. But I'm not. I'm always cautiously an optimist.
Yeah, yeah, that's the way to be, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And for Neolink, you guys obviously HQ in Sydney. I think last year expanded into Queensland and sort of grew the team, and then earlier this year expanded into Vic. What
Mhm.
is on the horizon for Neolink? Is it more expansion? Is it interstate? Is it more AI, more tech? Like, what does that look like for you guys?
It's probably a bit of all of the above, to be honest. I mean, we're coming up to our sort of 10-year sort of anniversary in the next couple of years, and we've got our 10-year business plan that we want to hit. But it's all the things that you mentioned above. So we're continuing to sort of expand into state. And even though, probably New South Wales has only ever been probably about 40% of our business anyway, but having a bit more of a presence in those markets and growing the business interstate is going to be important. Acquisitions, as we talked about, is the other one, whether that's I think probably a bit more domestically or looking at potentially the international expansion is a little bit interesting, especially learning from this RIF acquisition. It's not as easy as people think. So I think being a bit conservative around that is going to be important. But I'm really focused on, for me, what's going to happen with AI and just really putting my ear to the ground and learning as much as I can, as well as Chris and the rest of our team out there around
Mm.
how we learn, deploy. I had a dinner on Monday with one of our partners that has a joint investment with OpenAI. So we feel like we've got really good partners we can learn from, trial and test. We're trialing probably two or three different AI bots and products at the moment. And so fundamentally, we're looking at how we can be better for our customers, but then how we can, but then also just being, I think, cautious with it as well. You kind of want to, I think going all in is not necessarily the smartest thing to do. But I'm excited about the horizon of what that can do, both for the business, but then also what it can do for our customers. The more we can free up our people in here and reskill and retool them to sort of do more of sort of the data analysis, the quarterly or monthly business reviews, look at adjusting sort of supply chains. I do think the industry will look very, very differently over the course of the next, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So,
Mm.
and how we offer our services and how what type of services we offer. I think it can create new products and new services that we offer to the industry in consulting, whether that's supply chain analysis. I think there's a range of different things we can do. So I'm very excited about what's in store for us in the business, but also the entire industry as well.
Do you think any particular roles within freight forwarding are going to look different over the next, I don't know, call it 3 to 5 years? Like I'm just thinking, we've seen a couple of examples where large corporates, CBA is one, right, where they came out and said, we're going to make redundant a bunch of customer service people and bring in AI. They did a backflip on that. I think Atlassian might have done something similar. Not to scare any customer service people out there, but I would just love your view on maybe how some of like the roles might evolve, not necessarily be just replaced, but I think roles will just evolve over time. What's your view on it?
I had a view on this when I sat down with Chris and I looked at that manila folder on his desk in 2016. My view on it was that heavy departmentalization in this industry was almost completely unnecessary. And that was a very probably naive way of thinking about it, right? And sometimes a little bit of naivety you can get away with. My view has always been around the traditional data entry operator role as more automation came in, and I didn't think about AI, none of us did, but we thought that, right, okay, if we have a one point of contact model that can effectively have a lot of the data entry, a lot of the systems automation would only have to get involved on an exception basis type role was always going to be important. The big thing for me was learning from engaging with freight forwarders when I was at Lion was basically if you're dealing with the person that actually is in control of what's going on or understands the intricacies around how the freight moves from point A to point B, all the different parts of the tech, both the tech stack, the different key stakeholders, all of the data sets. If you understand that as a whole and you can have the conversation with the customer about that entire process back to front, and it's not
Mm.
just having access to a really cool platform which can track the AIS data, there might be different trigger and notifications that come out to them when these things happen based on tracking data. It's about being able to bring that to life and really help them if there's ever a problem. It's funny, speaking to customers at the moment, I've actually had 3 people I've met with over the last sort of week that don't want to deal with online booking platforms and they want to make sure they're not dealing with AI. They actually want to make sure they're dealing with a person. And that
Mm.
one point of contact relationship and the human being element, I think, is really important. But to answer your question along a roundabout way, I think the idea in the future that you're going to have an import operator that books up a job, lodges a cargo, sends out a preload and flicks it over to, a customs broker and then over to a custom, and then you're going to have a customer service person, a key account manager that works across a customer. I think we're deluded to think that that's going to exist. So my advice would be to anybody that's in the industry, I think that you want to be taking your operational skill set and speaking to customers and we've done that since the end of 2016. We had a view that I want to take really great operators and really great customer service people or people that have operations backgrounds and teach them how to engage with customers and use data and information to help them plan their supply chains. So I have no doubt that there's going to be some challenges with that, to be honest with you. I think I interviewed somebody from a multinational ago, unnamed. They manage a team of close to nearly 30 people in Sydney. The specific job task they do in our business is either AI or automation. That entire role
Wow.
and skill set is redundant in my business. So the question is there, how do you redeploy? How do you reskill? How do you make sure that you're prepared? And that is a very sensitive topic, I think. But I think if we're not having those conversations now, and we're not thinking about that more broadly as an industry, I think that's going to create some challenges. I think it creates a lot of positivity as well, because if you go into these new roles where you can handle more volume, you can handle more work, and you can do it more efficiently, naturally, I think pay goes up for everybody else. I think pay goes up. And then on top of that as well, you're engaging in more value added tasks. You're not getting involved in who wants to be chasing down a packing declaration out of China. Like it's just a waste of time. So
Mm.
I think it can be a waste of time, but it can also be really important to get the shipment cleared. But is that a value added task, or could that be an AI bot that's doing that for us? I think there's other value added tasks commercially around how you make sure you reduce additional costs, how you pick the right services, how you're analyzing what the shipping plan looks for the next 4, 8, 12 weeks ahead. Maybe it's thinking about, how you're managing, demurrage and detention across customers that are importing large volumes in a more efficient way. I do think that heavily departmentalized structure, I think is going to be completely flipped on its head over the next few years. And I think you're going to see more companies look at how they implement, I think, a more of a kind of one point of contact model structure.
And I think probably if there's one key takeaway, right, it's learn AI, and that's for everyone, every industry.
100%, mate. I think I'm sure you guys are doing it as well and in your business. And I think if you're not learning and educating yourself on this, I think, you're going to be on the, behind the, I guess on the back foot, if you like. And, I am also optimistic that I think the industry's got some very, very smart people involved. There's people with some great businesses out there that are our competitors. There's
Mm.
also people in the industry that are, key stakeholders and suppliers to us that I think understand technology. So I'm very optimistic, actually, more than anything, that I think people understand what's coming, and I think we can prepare people within the industry and help educate and learn and get them into the right roles. And I'm excited for that. And I think people will also get more value. I think just entering in data, I think is a very boring, rudimentary job. So I think thinking a bit more broadly, opening up your mind to broader roles. I think that's what's going to be exciting.
What would you say to potentially a graduate or someone really young that's looking to enter the industry? So we've talked a little bit about, people with experience and those departmentalized folks where they probably need to cross train and cross skill into some other areas moving forward. But for someone that's maybe 18, 19, just out of school or just out of uni, what would your bit of advice be to them trying to enter the industry?
My advice would be, I think, if no matter what business is that you're going into, I would be actually asking them yourselves the questions around what different type of AI tools and automation are you deploying within the business? How do you see that affecting my role or my career? And really putting it to the interviewer. And trust me, they would love it. And if a person pushes that question away in the interview process, it's probably not the right place for you. But I would say I go back to that inquisitive nature. I think if you're naturally inquisitive and you want to learn, I think the right type of company will take you on and give you a go. And I think you also, as an 18, 19-year-old, you're coming into an industry, I think, that's about to go through a lot of change. And I think that can be quite exciting because you're getting a hold of tools that are completely reshape how we go about doing business and seeing different products and different services evolve. That's a really exciting time. I think we're in a really exciting industry that has, typically had its challenges, I think, recruiting new people into freight forwarding and logistics. But I think we're going to be on the forefront of a lot of this change because we're probably one of the industries that can benefit the most. There's so much pressure, I think, on freight forwarders in general and logistics with regards to margins. But I think that with that comes a great opportunity. And if you're a young graduate coming in, you want to be finding it can be a trucking company, whether it's trucking, whether it's warehousing. I've seen some really awesome sort of 3PL and facilities over the course of the last couple of weeks. It could be a freight forwarder, it could be even a shipping line. But if I think if they've not got some type of a plan or education or training where you can learn and test and try different tools, that's where I'd be a little bit more concerned joining a business where it's legacy systems. There's no talk of change. There's no talk of adapting to what's going to come down the road. I question whether that's going to probably be the right business for you. Because I think
Mhm.
we're younger, and the younger, it's funny, a lot of the younger graduates that are coming in, they're going to be our future customers as well, the way that I see it. And I think if you come into this industry as well, it can be a great pathway into working in supply chain roles, whether it's at a Lion, whether it's at a Unilever or a Nestle. It can be a great pathway for you to then progress into those more sort of customer supply chain side roles. And if you're doing something that's more holistic across the supply chain, I think you'll learn a huge skill set that could be very valuable to our customers. So I don't want to think that our industry is a bit of a stepping stone, but we can also be a great breeder of talent that can go out into the industry and be real champions of what freight forwarders bring of value and work with freight forwarders. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think it could be a great stepping stone for for different young people as well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. That's awesome. And just to sort of start to wrap up, one thing I like to do is ask just a quick kind of rapid fire few questions, put you on the spot a little bit. So the first question is, what is the strangest shipment that you guys have had to move, or most unique potentially?
We had a piano that had to go to New Zealand, which was a personal import, and the airline decided to put it on a flight to Tahiti instead of Fiji, and we couldn't find it for nearly 2 weeks. Airway bills were cut. It ended up being a nightmare. We ended up getting there at the end, but the airline and the handling crew just decided to put it on a completely different flight, which was
Oh wow,
hilarious. But it wasn't hilarious. But luckily, I remember calling. It was almost like a few months into starting the business, and I ended up calling and it was just a personal import for a fairly decent sized customer, and he was just laughing. As I just said to him, "We don't know where it is," and his brother was importing it, and he found the funny side of it. So it didn't make me feel easy about it because it was like a family heirloom or something. And anyway, we found it and got it there in the end.
at least he took it well. And if you weren't running Neolink, what career path do you think you would be in?
I'd probably be working at Suntory because my old boss seems to have taken everybody from Lion to Suntory. So I think I'd probably be working for Suntory right now.
Any books or podcasts that kind of shaped how you think of business and life in general?
Couple Atomic Habits, which is a great
That's a good
book,
one.
and the other one I literally just finished reading, which was brilliant. And you know that I'm a big fan of this because we do it as part of our hiring processes. Principles by Ray Dalio. That's been probably one of the best books I've ever read. I would highly recommend it. And and the 7 Habits of Successful People, which is by Dr. Steve Covey, and that's a part of our culture and our behaviors that we have here at Neolink. So I love all 3 of those books.
Nice. All very good. And just to wrap up, what piece of advice would you give to your 18-year-old self if you could sort of go back and start over? Not to get too deep and philosophical on you, but keen to hear.
Gosh, that's a really, really good question. Really difficult when it comes. Manage your own expectations if you do end up starting your own business with your best mate.
That's great.
You're gonna have a lot of fun, but it's also gonna be at times you're gonna have a lot of fun. It's gonna be really exciting. Yeah, be patient. Just I think on the journey and enjoy, and more importantly, enjoy it. I think that the one thing that a lot of people don't do, I think a lot of the time is, and I'm definitely, and you'll probably say this as well, Sam. I don't know how you think, but I think just enjoy it. I think the big problem is sometimes is that, especially in this industry, it can be high pressure, high pace environment. You're always moving on to sort of either the next, deal or the next customer meeting, and you kind of stop but when you actually sit back and you actually look at what we do for a living, all of us in this space, we play a pretty critical role I think, in the broader economy. And sometimes sitting back and sort of enjoying the journey and enjoying that. And I'm saying this as somebody that doesn't do this at all, but I'm saying this to myself more than anybody. I think enjoy it. Just enjoy the journey.
Yeah. And I think also I would just add to that is people that are thinking about maybe going out on their own or starting a business, you're not doing it because you want flexibility and, work-life balance and money, especially in the early days, right? I promise you're not going to have that. So don't go into it thinking those things.
I will say this. I think going out and starting certain sort of e-com businesses and things like that, people have tried and tested different things. I think I don't want to scare people away from trying and going out and doing their own thing. But I think the one thing that we definitely had, where we were very lucky, we had some terrific mentors. But there's also a really big reality check, I think, that you get when you do go out and start your own business. And I think, the one thing that we did very well, we did it all on our own dime. We bootstrapped it ourselves. We didn't take any funding. We didn't take any venture capital. We didn't take any private equity money. And so we control our own destiny. And I've heard horror stories from, good friends of mine that have started really, really big software businesses. And it isn't all it's cracked up to be. It's quite difficult. I think you have to understand if it's in your DNA or not. And I couldn't have never have done this myself. I've got a terrific business partner. So we both what's best for Neolink first. And yeah,
Yeah.
we're both quite lucky that in that way that we kind of have each other to work with. So yeah, it works out.
That's awesome. Mate, thank you. It's super impressive what you guys have achieved, and I think with a relatively lean team that you guys have makes it even more impressive as well. So congrats to you and Chris and the team. It's really good to see. For anyone that wants to connect, you're on LinkedIn. Obviously, they can check out the website, which is definitely one of the better websites in this industry. I will say that. Thanks for your time, and
Cheers, mate. Thanks for inviting me, mate. I really appreciate it.